It is time for my most elaborate video of the year, which is my palette ranking. I am going to be ranking to you all the palettes that are new for this year, that I have tried this year, from absolute worst, least favorites, do not buy these, buy anything but these, until my absolute tippity top favorite, the one that I truly love, the one that inspires me the most, and the one that I went truly when I opened it, which is what I'm wearing today. So we will start at the very bottom, which is position 115. And we'll work our way up until the top. Some of these palettes are going to be ranked together because they released at the same time, and I feel pretty similar about them. So they'll just be clumped together as one. So there's actually more than 115 palettes here. And for that reason, I will not be able to link all the palettes down below. I will link maybe, I don't know, top 15 or something down the description box in case you're interested in the absolute top palettes of the year. I will also have my affiliate codes and my affiliate links down below. You can always try Angelica at checkout when you are buying indie brands, because indie brands is my bread and butter. I love indie brands. I have been loving indie brands since I started YouTube almost a decade ago. It is still the absolute majority of the palettes, not even like almost all of the palettes that we're going to be talking about today is from indie brands. It is my absolute passion. It is what I love reviewing. So we're going to be talking most about that. But I do have some mainstream brands here as well. And I do have some mainstream brands that actually like surprised me this year, both in a good way and in a bad way. So we're going to be talking about that too. And also, quick announcement before we jump into it. There's going to be a couple of palettes here that actually launched in the end of last year that I tried and reviewed after I did my ranking last year. I did ask you if you wanted me to include those palettes in this year's ranking, and a majority of you said yes. So a couple of these palettes were released at the end of 2023. They're going to be included here because they weren't included last year. And I'll probably do the same next year. You know what? I'll do like the end of this year if there's any more palettes that I want to include, because I do know that there's a couple of that I haven't been able to get to yet. I'll include those in next year as well, just so that we have like all the palettes included. I also will say, of course, that I will not be including Cinch Beauty Galactic Visitor in this ranking. This is the palette that I did myself with my own indie brand, Cinch Beauty. And of course, I am very biased. I love this palette. I made this palette. And I just want to let you know why I will not be including that palette, because clearly very biased. It's my palette. I made it. Oh, and I did film this eye look, by the way, and I will try and remember to have that one edited, and I will put like it up on YouTube or wherever. I did a little short. So just know that this eye look will definitely be available somewhere. And if it's already live, I will put a link in either the description box or the pinned comment, just so you know. And if you want to guess what made this look before you like peek in the description box, no peeking, no cheating, let me know what you think. Because I will say, if you would have asked me, what brand do you think is going to make the best palette of the year? I would not have guessed this. Bottom position is going to be very easy. This is the Kiss Glamlight and Kiss palette. I'm going to try and just quickly mention why I don't like palettes. This one is very easy. I don't think this is the good Glamlight quality. I quite honestly think that this quality is pretty subpar to what Glamlight can do with their palettes. The mattes are okay, but overall the color story is pretty uninspired and the shimmers are just not great. This is not the great Glamlight formula. I think that they are making their palettes in two different labs, and I don't think that they have paid enough attention to making sure that the formulas are the same between the labs. I don't think that this is the normal great Glamlight formula, and if you love Glamlight, I will still steer you clear of this one. And I feel the same about the ones that are the next position. These are the Nightmare on Elm Street. These did, of course, release late last year, but I reviewed them after I did the ranking. So this is the one that's the greeny palette. I think the mattes are perfectly fine. The shimmers are pretty subpar. It's pretty hard pressed. It's not as impressive as Glamlight can be. And also I feel like the color story, it is not inspired enough. This is the red one. I just like, I don't know, there's something about these, they're not as good. I think that this one has a better color story. There's more variation in this, but the quality just isn't as good as they can be with Glamlight. And that's why these are at the bottom. And I feel exactly the same about these. These are the Nomad Air palettes, and I don't like these. And it's because I think that Nomad has done so much better. There is a bluey green one. There is a neutral, like orangey warm one. And then there is a cool tone, like almost like a gray taupe one. These are not the same quality, according to me, as Glamlight has with their other formulas. The mattes are thinner. I don't think they're as pigmented. I don't think they build as good. And I think the shimmers are pretty non-impressive, to be honest. And these would have made perfect travel palettes if I have liked these, the quality of these as much as I normally like, which I don't. Feel the same about this one. This is Lotte London's The Jewels. Pretty meh. I actually liked a yellow brown palette that I tried from Lotte London last year. I thought that one was really nice, especially for being the drugstore. I'm like, this is nice. This one, no. The mattes are very sheer. They're not very buildable. The shimmers are okay, but not good enough to warrant or like to lift up or make up for, I should say, the very weak mattes. I'm just like, no, I don't think that this was good at all. This is where we get into preference. And of course, a lot of these things are gonna be preference. And also, like, I love warm tones. I love colorful looks. I love variations in palettes. I love inspiring, unexpected color stories. I love a mix between like really light shades and really dark shades. I prefer when palettes have either equal mattes and shimmers or more mattes than shimmers. And also I'm starting to get pretty hooded eyes with age because I'm 40 years old and I don't love when shimmers crease on me. And there's a couple of brands out there that are very like favorite brands of people. And we'll get to that I think they are really, really nice, but I have to be a little bit finicky with the shimmers because they do crease on me. So if you are in the same position as me, I'm gonna try and make sure to point that out as we go through some of these things. So this is going to be the Natasha Denona Hyper Natural Face Palette. I'm fairly sure that this one released this year. I have like Googled a lot of this, but this one, I thought that this was going to be a really nice one and done palette for traveling. These shimmers are okay. I'm not amazingly blown away by them. And I thought that I was going to be able to use this bronzer and this blush as like matte shadows as well. But they're incredibly sheer to the point that for me, they don't work at all in the crease the way that I like to do my makeup. So these are more like one and done shadows. And then there's a bronzer and a blush. The bronzer is leaning very neutral as well, which fits a lot of people, but again, it's not what I love. So this is just a preference thing. This palette just didn't end up working the way that I wanted this palette to work. So for me, this is a no-go. I don't love face palettes. I thought I was gonna be able to use this as a one and done palette, but it's not. This is not that for me. I will always need to bring something else as well. And for that reason, this doesn't make sense for me. It's not the way that I want to do my makeup. And I also don't think that this is the best shimmer formula that Natasha Denona has. I'm just like, I wasn't blown away by this. So for me, that was like a nothing thing. Oh my God, I'm already warm. I'm like, what, 5 palettes in, I'm already warm and I already want to have a drink. Send help. This is the DD Signature Chromebook Volume 1. I am not myself a diehard fan for these like all shimmer palettes, all duochromes. And this is fine quality. There's nothing wrong with the quality, but I also have similar things to this in other palettes that I own, and I will never reach for an all shimmer palette. So for me, again, these are better shimmer quality according to me than this, but it's still like I never reach for an all shimmer palette, so that's not for me. Next, we have a palette that's actually from a brand that I really, really love, but I didn't love the Gourmandises palette by Gourmande Girls. This one is, according to me, not the formula that I know and love. I think the shimmers creased incredibly on me, kind of instantly, and you can almost see, yeah, you can see some of the oils have been seeping into the formula. Those are the kind of formulas that look amazing when you swatch them, but they have a tendency of not wearing the best. Also, some of these masks are very hard pressed, and I didn't think the pastels worked as great as I am used to Gourmande Girls formula working. I just didn't feel like this was the formula that I know and love from the brand, even though I think the color story is really interesting. So that's why this one is so low. The next one is going to be a preference and a creasing thing. And this is the Crow palette by Wicked Widow. I honestly think that the quality of the mattes are absolutely incredible. Love it. But there are also some shades in here that are fairly similar. There is like an almost black, a dark gray that's almost black, and then there's a black. And there's a couple of like I don't want to say similar. I understand this color story and where they're coming from, but it almost could have been a 12 pan. And also these shimmers unfortunately crease on me as well. But I do think it swatches out beautifully. The looks that I've done are absolutely stunning. They just crease on me, and I also think that some of the shades are a little bit more similar. And also, here comes preference. I don't love working with gray. It is my least favorite shade to work with, and for me, grays in a palette, unless it's a shimmer gray like a silver, they're usually a throwaway shade. It's just not something that I personally love working with. And again, I know that that is very much a personal preference, because I know a bunch of people are diehard gray fans, and I get it. I'm a diehard yellow and orange fan. Next is the Colourpop and Bratz palette. I don't think that you have seen that. I did a video where I was reviewing all the releases of Colourpop this year. That video is already live on my channel. Check that out. I think it was Monday's video if you want to see me talk about every Colourpop release of this year. What I will say, the palettes from Colourpop this year this has not been my favorite Colourpop year. Let me put it like this. This has not been my favorite Colourpop year. I also did have a Best of Beauty 2024, and there was not a single Colourpop item in there. And it makes me sad because I love Colourpop, but I don't think that they have really brought out, according to me, something that's been like, wow, this year, which I usually feel. You know, Lush Life, Good Sport, or Palm Springs palette. Oh my God, I loved the Palm Springs palette. I don't feel Colourpop had anything like that this year, and I think the main culprit are these stupid, crunchy, bunchy, sandpaper, gritty feeling, glitter infused shadows that they do that swatch or look beautiful in the pan, but I can feel them on my lid and it's driving me crazy. Some more than others. These, the Bratz ones, more. These are Grit City, and I don't like working with them. I don't like wearing them, and I wish they would just cease to exist. And I really hope that 2025 is the year where Colourpop stops with that. I just really hate them. Just increase your prices and do great eyeshadows again. Please and thank you. There is a post-it on this one. This is how I'm organizing this whole endeavor. Next one is one that also released late last year, and this is the mini side-by-side by Nabla, and this is the side-by-side baby. This is really good quality, but it's a very uninspiring color story to me. 3 shimmers, 6 mattes. It has a very light one, it has a very dark one. If you like a mauvey, somewhat neutral, but a little bit mauvey pinky palette, this is nice quality, but it's a little bit uninspiring. So it's nice quality, but it's one of those where I'm just like, sure, whatever you say. It's just a little bit uninspiring. I also will say most of the palettes that we have seen here so far have decluttered. I think I am saving the Crow palette though for reference, but these just weren't my favorites of this year. Let me get a new pile. Next palette on the list is another Colourpop palette, and this is the Golden Hour palette. I think that this palette is a perfectly fine golden leaning neutral palette. There's a little bit of an orange undertone going on over here. Again, there are, I think, 2, or is it only 1? No, there's 1 of the glittery shadows. I was seeing different texture. This is actually a Super Shock shadow, and this one is one of those glittery ones. So at least there's only 1. It does go from pretty dark to pretty light. It does have some shimmers and mattes. It's a pretty decent palette, but again, it's not one of their absolute best palettes that they've ever done. And also, it is a neutral palette, and I think that I would have ranked this higher had it had an actual mustard or an actual orange in there, so that you could go a little brighter if you wanted to. It's fine, but nothing more. And I feel there is Colourpop, a lot of Colourpop in the bottom, okay? Everybody be prepared. Prepare for Colourpop. So this is the Colourpop. It's the Frosted Snowman. Still have not seen that cartoon. Oh, also, some of these palettes I've gotten in PR. Some of them I have bought myself. I would say about maybe a 1/4 of these palettes I've bought myself. All mainstream palettes I bought myself. And I would say probably most indie palettes I have gotten in PR. Some Colourpop I've gotten in PR, some not. But just assume, if I don't mention it, assume that it's PR. I'm just, for transparency, assume that it's PR. This one I did get in PR. I think that this color story is pretty nice, and it has some of my favorite matte shadows from Colourpop, which are these pastel, really opaque pastels with like finely milled shimmer in them. Colourpop does those so well, but there's a couple of those gritty shades in here, and I kind of wish that instead of having a dark gray and a dark black, wow. She's doing the damn thing. But instead of adding a gray and a black, I kind of wish that we would have had maybe a dark blue or something, or maybe even like a dark something like this, a dark cool tone berry, like something else than a gray and a black. It could have been great without the glitter and with another dark shade in here, but it just isn't. I said what I said. Next is another neutral palette, and this is from Gloss Gods. This is the Let's Get Nude palette. This one isn't interesting because it has one of those like more multi-chrome shades. You can see it's like a peach to like a greeny gold. It's a very interesting. There is also, I think that it is this shade right here. Yeah, that has a little bit of that, like there are some special shades in here. I will say though, and I say this with love, I love Gloss Gods, but I do think that they could improve their matte formula a smidgen. It is good, but it's not perfect, and it's definitely like it's an okay matte formula. I can work with it, but I wish it was even better. But overall, it's an interesting neutral palette. And Gloss Gods is nice because it is a Swedish indie brand that ships from Sweden. So if you're living in the EU, this is a way to save on taxes in case you're interested. Next is the first palette from the brand By Us. I love this artwork. This makes me so happy. I'm a child at heart. I am. I love cartoons. I love hot cocoa. Listen, yesterday, we ate popcorn, candy, drank hot cocoa, and watched cartoons. Listen, don't come for me. So I love stuff like this. I think it's so cute. I wish the packaging wasn't so bulky though. And I think the color story leaves a lot to be desired because I feel like this is another one of those palettes that's just trying to do everything. It's like a rainbow palette with a brown, and it's like a bunch of different shimmers. And I honestly think the color story is fairly okay. I wish they would have skipped a couple of these and just like, you don't have to do all the colors, but I do love the colorfulness of the packaging. I think that is so cute. But I will say, this is this more squishy formula, which sometimes this is not the squishy formula that creases on me. Again, I do have some problems sometimes with things creasing on me. This formula did not crease on me, but that's like, for some people it does and for some people it does not, but this is not the putty formula that creases on me. Also, the Glam Light putty formula does not crease on me either. It doesn't have enough of that like oily emollients to it, but it's pretty hard to pick up on a brush, and I do prefer a non-squishy formula if I can choose. That's just a personal preference though. I feel like this palette, it could, again, it's like bulky, so you have to be like finneging down. I just wish that this could have been even better. I'm interested to see what they do in the future. I hope we don't have to see the bulky packaging because I don't love that. It still doesn't feel super flimsy though. It feels like pretty substantial. Oh, and By Us is a sister brand to Oden. So do with that information as you will. I think it was okay, but nothing more. But also I thought that Oden's first palette was okay, but nothing more as well. So I'm excited to see where that brings us. Now we're getting into even more Colourpop. Hold on to your panties. This is the After Hours palette. Thought this color story was really good. It's like a cool toned burgundy, cool tone purple kind of a palette. I actually really enjoy this palette's color story, but it has a couple of those gritty ones. I wish it didn't have it, and I feel the same about this one. This is the Colourpop Stranger Things. I actually really like this color story. I think this is a color story that does a lot without trying to do everything. And I like the undertones of these, and I think it really represents the show. It goes from light to dark. There is 2 of those gritty shades in here, but the reason why this one is a little bit higher is because I think the color story is better, and also this one feels a little bit grittier, but this one doesn't feel as gritty. It's somehow a little bit smoother. So yeah, do with that information as well. Same, I think that every Colourpop palette this year has one of those gritty glitter shades. What is this? 2016? They called. They want their glitter shadow. Honestly, I don't even think they wanted the glitter shadows. Please make them stop. Also, this is truly though, if you think the Colourpop glitter shadows are not fun, they do not even compare to the formula of the pressed glitter in this Huda Beauty palette. Truly an awful formulation. I said what I said. I think the formula of Huda Beauty's shadows are perfectly fine. I think they work perfectly fine. I personally prefer Natasha Denonna's formula, and I know others prefer this formula over Natasha Denonna, so I think that is just a preference thing. How you work with eyeshadow, how you want it to behave, what kind of result you're looking for. I think that like whether you prefer one formula over another, it's preference. But here it is. I cannot forgive this. This awful, gritty, sand pressed glitter in a palette that's what, $70 at Sephora in 2024, in the year of 2024. No, I cannot forgive that. Also, a bunch of these shades, this one, this one, this one, this one, they look kind of different here, but they're all very light and white based, and they look fairly similar even on my light medium skin tone. And I think that this palette, it's almost like it was made to look good in the pan, but we didn't fully think about how are we going to utilize these colors and get the most out of this palette and make it as versatile as possible, because it looks really appealing like this, but you buy a palette to use it, not to take a picture of it. At least me. Something that I think is a really good quality, but I cannot rank it higher than this because of the color story, is this all matte palette by Makeup by Mario. But I say this, and hear me as I say this, great quality mattes. And I know Makeup by Mario reformulated from the first time that he released eyeshadows, and these are great. I really like the quality. It's just not my color story. If he comes up with this quality in an all matte palette that has more up my alley shades, listen, I'm down. Sign me up. This color story, it's not my favorite. I mean, I'm still the clown who bought it to be able to review it, but I can appreciate in neutral, I really can, but I think that this one is maybe, it has the contrast, but I want a little bit more, some kind of more undertones. Also, it's leaning a little bit more cool tone, and I probably would appreciate the warm tone that he has more. Now we are getting in, this is the Bella Beauté Bar, the Sun and the Sea palette. This is great quality. I love Bella Beauté Bar's quality. What I will say about this one, first and foremost, I think that the packaging of this feels dated. It could have been a little bit more worked on. There are ways to make your packaging feel more luxurious and feel a little bit more fun, and I think that this palette is lacking some of that. Also, this is a re-release of an old palette, and what I think they should have done when they re-released that palette is to either make it smaller or rework the color story a little bit, because I think that they just did the old palette in the new and improved formula, but these 4 shades are too similar. And these 2 shades are too similar, and they should have either taken 1 row off, taken 3 shades off, or made these 4 more different and made these 2 more different, because I feel like it's almost like, oh, we had this old palette, we're going to re-release it in a newer, better formula. That's great. But also make sure that the color story makes sense, because I do think that the color story needed a little bit of tweaking too. More Colourpop. Listen, I told you, we're in the bottom. We're going to do Colourpop. This is a Colourpop in Pokemon. I love this packaging. I think they did so good with this. This is not a mega palette. This is one of their slightly bigger palettes. And this is a rainbow palette, and I quite honestly think that this is really cute. And I like that it has some darker shades down here. And this like almost like satin reddish brown is honestly very, very, very interesting. Again, it has a couple of those gritty shades. I think it has 3. 1, 2, 3. Like it's this one, right? Yeah. It's a perfectly fine rainbow palette. But Colourpop has done better rainbow palettes than this. And if this had these be shimmer shades instead of those glittery shades, I think I would have placed this even higher, because I do think that it's fun that it has some mattes with shimmer in it. It has some iridescent shades. It has this satin shade. There's a different formulas in here. I just wish that one of the formulas weren't the glittery shade. And also, it wouldn't have been bad to have another darker shade in here as well. Maybe a dark blue, maybe like a dark reddish brown would probably have made sense with a bunch of these colors, but you can use that satin shade as well. Definitely. Okay, I got myself a new pile, and now we're getting into one of the biggest, if not the biggest palette I've ever owned. I do not own any of those other big palettes that I have, so I can't compare them. But this is the collab between Blend Bunny and Ellis Atlantis, and it's like, it is quite literally bigger than my head. It is humongous, and I understand who this is for, but it's not me. It is not me. I don't love a palette that is this big. It is so heavy. This lid is so big. There is no way that you can hold this one up and do your makeup. You have to put it down. So even if you put this on your sink while you're doing makeup, this quite honestly does not fit on my sink. If I were the person who did my makeup in my bathroom, it wouldn't fit there. I would have to put it on my toilet, which feels very unhygienic. I just really think that this is the the quality is great. I'm gonna be honest with you. And I love the undertone of these shades up here. Absolutely stunning. But this is a classic case, according to me, of edit yourself. You can't have everything because it just ends up being too much. And I will never be the person that needs a palette to be, because I hear sometimes people being like, oh, I want this palette to be like everything you ever needed. I am not that customer. I don't want my palette to be that, because then it just ends up being this. And super big rainbow palette with too many shades. And I like, where's the vision? I don't see a color story. I don't see a vision. And I love Nomad Cosmetics. And I think Ellis Atlantis does amazing makeup. And this is for that person who just wants to buy one palette. I just don't know if that is Blend Bunny's customers. If people are finding Blend Bunny first. Maybe they are. Maybe they are. Maybe I'm not getting it. I just think that this is too big. This is an actual tabletop. And I feel sad because I want to love everything Blend Bunny releases, but this is just too big. I can't even store this in my makeup storage. Like, it's wider than me. It's too much. And I feel slightly the same about this one. And this is the Eternal Twilight palette by Oden. First of all, this packaging, if I could have it, honestly, I should ask them. Do you think I could get this as a print and put this on my wall? I love this. And I love that they're going back to Norse mythology. I am Swedish. The owner of Oden's Eye is Swedish. There are two brands that I write mails back and forth in Swedish, which is Gloss Gods and Oden's Eye. And I'm just like, it's nice. Otherwise, it's only my mom that gets the Swedish version of me. Of course, in Ricardo. People always ask, who do you speak Swedish? Do you and Ricardo speak Swedish or English? Of course, we speak Swedish to each other all the time. And now my friend Lisa's here too, so I have another one to speak Swedish to. But I think that this is just spectacular. But I do think that the inside, even though this is beautiful and I get the vision, I think this could have been made a little bit smaller if we had not spread this out so much. And I also kind of think like this color story, the orange and the pink. I love a color story like that, but Oden's Eye had done that. And I almost think they should have just released this one, because this color story is very unique for Oden's Eye, this alone. And I almost think that they should have done this and just put this cover and made it smaller. Maybe. And just gone from light to dark and just did like pastels going into like the darker ones. I also love the names. One is called Black and one is called Blackest. Absolutely love it. It's like a hint of a pun. Absolutely love it. This green down here is fantastic. There is a couple of ones here that are a little bit more of a flaky texture, which doesn't work on my 40-year-old lids. It does make them look a little bit more textured. I know a lot of people love that kind of a formula, but I'm letting you know there are a couple of those in here. Just so we know. This is the Sweet Aesthetics by DD Signature. This is an all matte palette. And I honestly don't think that there's anything wrong with this palette. This is a palette that is made to be pastels on a darker skin tone. So for me, they're not true pastels and I have to mix this with a white pigment, which there's absolutely nothing wrong with that whatsoever. It's not my favorite rainbow palette, I will say that, but I still think it's pretty cute. There are some pinks. I really like these two additions here. I think that's really fun. And this one, I love a shade like that. I don't know. I've been attracted to these kind of almost like neon pastel mints, or like not even mints. It's like a pea, pastel pea, like the vegetable, not the other. My English is failing me. I think this is nice, but this is not my favorite. I do know since then that DD Signature has improved their formula even more. And you will see the latest palette that they came out with. It's going to be about an hour until you see that palette. Let's put it like that. This is the Melt Fatally Yours palette that they did with Bailey Sarian. This is the palette that came out late last year. I think that this is perfectly fine. I do think though, the mattes from Melt used to be that like holy grail. Everybody was like comparing mattes to the Melt ones, but I think that other brands are doing it better than Melt now. These are very pigmented, but now when I try them next to other matte formulas that I like even more, I'm like, these are a little bit tricky to work with. These aren't as easy to blend. And also I think that this palette is lacking some contrast, because it might look like we have a light shade here and light shade here, but all of these look pretty dark on the eye. They're very pigmented, they go pretty dark, and I don't think there's enough contrast in here. I cannot do a full look with this one because all of the shades are leaning so dark, and I don't love my eye look to be that dark. And that's why this one is so low, because I'm like, I was kind of hoping there could have been a white in here so we can have deep, like, lightened up the shades. I think that would have made a lot of sense for me. But again, that's also a personal preference. Again, how I like to do my makeup, and personal preference is always going to be a factor in the ranking. I tried to explain the quality as well, but at the end of the day, a lot of these palettes are great. And it's going to come down to what makes me the most happy. This is the Glaminatrix Pretty in Pastels. I do have a broken shade here, so I'm trying to be a little bit careful when I hold this one up. I think this is a really fun pastel palette. It is not my absolute favorite pastel palette, because I think that these are not my favorite undertone when it comes to pastels, but I think it's really interesting to do a pastel palette that has some shades here that you could do a full look with it, and has like a darker shimmer and a pastel shimmer. I think this is a fun concept, but it's not my favorite palette from Glaminatrix, but I still think it's a pretty decent one. And then we have the Lethal Cosmetics. I keep forgetting. Okay, Lethal Cosmetics. This is a cry for help. Can we have names of the palettes? Like, on the packaging, they don't do that, and I'm just like, please, I'm begging you. Think this is Mellow Groove or Mellow Groove, one of the two. I think this came out, oh my god, there's a cat here. I think this one came out this spring, and I think this is a really nice palette, but I will say this background is not the right background for this color story. It looks much better swatched out than it does with this background, and there's something about opening this up with this background that just makes me less intrigued to use it, because the background is just all wrong for the colors that are in here. But I think that this is a very nice palette, but not my favorite palette from Lethal Cosmetics. Again, Lethal Cosmetics has had some absolute bangers this year. This is the Botanical palette by Beauty Bay. I thought that I was gonna absolutely love this palette, but there is something about this color story when I used it that I was like, the undertones, the way it blended together, this green just felt like a dusty old furniture on my eyes. I didn't love this one either. I thought it was going to be like this, but it just, there's almost like a little dusty undertone to this that I didn't love working with them. I think the quality is perfectly fine. I didn't love these shimmers as much as I have loved some shimmers from Beauty Bay. And I thought this palette was just okay, because I have loved some of the Beauty Bay palettes a whole lot. And these were just like, it was okay. It was okay. It's not my absolute favorite. Then more Colourpop. This is the Twilight palette. I think this is one of the better palettes they did. The packaging is really nice, and I love that they fully embraced that they are inspired by the first movie and that like weird blue filter that the whole movie had on it. This one does have, I think it has two of those like glittery shadows, but I think it's this one that's a little bit more, it feels gritty, and I think it's this one that feels a little smoother. But overall, I think the color story of this one is, it's very true to the movie. They work together. You can do different looks. You have a dark one, you have a light one, there's a bunch of shimmers. I really like this shade here. It's like a cool tone brown with like the shimmer in it. Those like wet look mattes, which is a very interesting Colourpop does those very good. I think those are really nice. I think this palette is really good, but again, on me, I don't love these gray cast leaning shadows, but I still think that they did a pretty good job with this palette, quite honestly. Now we're getting into a Natasha Denona palette, and I love the Natasha Denona quality. This is the I Need a Warm palette, and I thought that this palette, it has one of those like green, I think you can see green to gold to like red like multichromes, which is the most typical multichrome that you can get. And I quite honestly don't know why we put in a green red multichrome in a palette that's called I Need a Warm, like a neutral palette. I also don't necessarily think that this palette is exceptionally warm. If you cover this up, I just think that this is a neutral brown palette. I don't think that this is a particularly warm palette. If you're actually looking for a palette that's warm, I think the bronze palette, you're better off with that. For me, I was just pretty underwhelmed with this color story. I feel like it felt a little uninspired in a way that I didn't feel like the I Need a Nude, which I think is a really nice neutral palette. And even the golden one that at least had that golden undertone. With this one, I'm just a little bit confused. And there's this random multichrome in here that doesn't, according to me, 100% make sense in this palette. And also just like, how warm is this really? Again, I have a warm undertone, so on me, these do not pull warm at all. So I was just like a little uninspired. And I feel the same about this one. This is the Fresh Prince in Bel-Air by Glamlight. This is a perfectly fine color story, but they have already done this color story in better quality in the Rick and Morty palette. And this one doesn't have as interesting undertones as the Rick and Morty palette does. Of course, the Rick and Morty palette is bigger. It's a bigger rainbow palette, but that one, was that last year? I think it ranked like top 5 or something in my yearly ranking. Like, I really love that palette. I still stand by that palette, one of my favorite palettes from Glamlight. And I think that if you are buying something from Glamlight and you like this bright, colorful, slightly leaning on the neon rainbow, get that one instead. It's even better. And this one is a little bit more mid-tone and dark. There's not any lighter shades in here. Again, if you don't like lighter shades in eye palette, this might be the one for you. I just feel like this, as I have felt with quite a few palettes from Glamlight this year, if not all of them, at least in 2024, it doesn't fill a hole in their collection other than that it's a collab. And I think a lot of things are made right now by a lot of brands, not just Glamlight. They're made with the theming and the collab in mind, and not necessarily, does this fill a hole in our collection? Is this a usable color story? Does our customers want something like this from us, or do they already have something like this from us? And I think that this one, unfortunately, my personal opinion, I don't think that this one was a palette that makes sense in the whole grand scheme of Glamlight. A new pile, and that is gonna be Colourpop. This is the Colourpop Lost in Love. I loved, was it last year Colourpop did a Halloween? Why do I keep calling Valentine's Halloween? I keep doing that all the time. It's not a scary holiday. This is the Valentine's palette. And I love the one from last year way more than I love this one. First of all, that one had more contrast. It had a white and it had a dark, dark red. This one is more mid-tone and almost light. And I think there's at least, yeah, there's 2 of those glittery shadows in here as well. I feel like I've said what I need to say about that formula. We're moving on. Now we're getting into the precious metals. And I think this is probably the best quality palette that Colourpop came up with this year. If you love neutrals and if you like a slight, I mean, this isn't fully as big as my torso. It's a little bit smaller. And this one is great quality. And you have so many neutral options in here. Cool tones, warm tones, neutrals, light ones, dark ones. There's a black. There is a white metallic, but not a white matte. And the metallics in here are really good quality, like good Colourpop quality. There's a couple of those glitter shades in here. I think there's like 2 or 3. I think there's 2, but 2 shadows and a bigger mega palette like this is honestly not that horrible. And I think overall the quality of this palette is really good. And there are some really interesting undertones in here. And I think they did a really good job with this palette. Is it my favorite color story? No, but I like what I've done with the palette. So I can't say like, it's not a bad palette. It's definitely not. I think they did a good job with it. Next one is the Profusion and Turtles. I love the packaging with the slime. So cute. This is the first Profusion palette that I ever tried. And quite honestly, I think most of these shadows are really good quality. The shimmers are really intense and impressive. Some of the mattes, especially the blue and purple, are not as impressive as some of the greens. Some of the greens are really good. But overall, I think this is a really nice palette, especially from the drugstore. And quite honestly, I'm more impressed with this palette than I've been with any of the Colourpop palettes this year. And that makes me, I love the Colourpop packaging more than I like this though. Even though this is, I mean, this is cute with the little slime thing. I just really hope that 2025 is a Colourpop palette comeback year. Fingers crossed. That's what I would like to see. But quite honestly, I thought this palette was pretty decent. I think it's a fun one, and it's exciting to see something that is from the drugstore and that is a collab from the drugstore being that nice. Now we're getting into a Nomad Cosmetics palette, and this is the Keys Beachy and Peachy. Beachy and Peachy. Too many of those sounds. I think that this one, not my favorite packaging. And I also don't love that it's black on the inside, because I feel like it's black on the inside and the colors are pretty jumbled up. And I swatched this as a rainbow to show that this is a bright / pastel rainbow palette with a dark like blurple shade, so you can deepen it up. And I think that the composition of the shades in here together with the black background is not doing this palette any favors whatsoever, and I think that is a shame. I think that this palette is okay. I think it's leaning a little bit too much on the turquoise, which is not my absolute favorite shadow like color to wear. And I just think that this is a color story that's leaning itself to be a little bit hard to grapple with the peach and the turquoise, especially when it's jumbled up like this. And I think it would have been benefited from being edited a little bit, because I don't mind the theming of it. I just don't think it's 100% well executed. This actually, here we have a Colourpop palette that is a little higher. I think that this one is ranked a little bit higher. Is this better quality than the Precious Metals? Probably not. But the color story is better. The packaging is better. This is the Colourpop Beauty and the Beast palette. This one is really nice. This one has one of those glitter shadows, but this is actually really smooth. And this one just looks like a wet look on the eyes. And I think this is probably one of the better ways that they've been able to do those shadows. And I think this palette is really nice. It is not as good quality as Precious Metal, but I think the color story is really good. It really goes with the movie. It's a nice 12 pan. And I think that they were able to execute this collab really well. I hope to see more well thought out collabs like this in 2025. Just even less of those glitter shadows. Although I will say, when they're like this and they look like a wet look, I could be about them. Now we're getting into the first Ensley Rain palette. And I'm saying this is a caveat. Love Ensley Rain. I think they make amazing quality eyeshadows, but this is my personal least favorite color story. And it is because of what I said at the beginning, which is that I don't love working with gray eyeshadow. And this is the Cold Moon. And this is quite honestly the best quality gray toned or cool tone palette that I have in my collection. The mattes go from light to dark. There's a bunch of different shimmers in here. You have a little bit more of a pinky mauve, slightly leaning on berry, so you can go a little bit more colorful. But again, if I'm gonna reach for an Ensley Rain palette, it's not gonna be this one for me, because it's not perfect for me. But if you look at this and you're like, wow, this is the most beautiful palette ever, I can tell you right now, the quality is really beautiful. It is just my least used Ensley Rain palette, because this isn't my favorite color story. But they always do a lot of like different formulas within their palettes. Their shimmers are really, really impactful. Some of them sometimes are a little bit flaky, but I think overall they do a really good job with including a bunch of different formulas in here and really special like shimmers. And I actually also really love their mattes. I think their mattes work really good for me. They're pigmented and buildable and blendable, and I really, really, really like them. Now we're getting into the Too Faced Aptly in Love. I love this packaging. I think it's really cute. This is a really nice palette, and if you like something that is slightly more colorful from like mainstream, you want to go to Ulta or Sephora, I have had good luck with the Too Faced palettes that are in this like tin packaging. I like the Italian Spritz from last year too. This one smells almost like a little like sweet spicy. I think overall this is a good palette. Don't expect those really intense shimmers in here. That's not what this is, but they're good enough. They work really nice, and for being a mainstream brand, I think it's a very nice palette. I also will say the mattes, they don't swatch amazingly, but they pick up really well with the brush. The kind of formula that like Viseart has. I'm not comparing this to Viseart. I'm just saying that's the kind of matte formula where they don't swatch amazingly, but they work really good with the brush, which at the end of the day is the most important thing. I also have, and these I'm putting at the same position because I rank them like that because I do rankings throughout the year as well. I do review makeup throughout the year, try to put up a bunch of videos. This is the Oceano and Paleo palette by Cleona. They did re-release this palette this year. Well, this one is a new one. This is a re-release. We're going to talk about Orkeo in a bit because I did actually like that one more. So let's talk first about the one that's the new palette. I think this palette has a bunch of really good shadows, but I just don't think they work together. I just don't think that these necessarily work together, and I think that's a shame. All in all, if I see these as singles, this one is amazing, this one is amazing, this one is so good. I love this one here. I've tried to do looks where I just use this palette and I come up short, and I'm not saying that I'm an eyeshadow pro, but I would stick my neck out and say that I'm fairly good with colorful eyeshadow, and I'm not the person that has a problem coming up with good looks, but I did have a problem coming up with good looks that incorporated more than 2 or 3 shadows from this palette. So I think that this one, the color story doesn't 100% work. And I think with the Paleo palette, I think that this, again, the shadows are really nice. I think that this is pretty much exactly how the Paleo palette looked before. And I think that since then, trends, what people prefer in palettes, all of these things have come a little further. And I think the same as I said with that Bella Beauté bar palette, the Sun and the Sea, the Siren, whatever it was called, I think that maybe it would have benefited them to also update the color story a little bit, bring it into 2024. I think that this palette would have benefited from that, because the brown and the blue mid-tone palette is not as popular now as it used to be. Here's another Colourpop palette. Did I rank this one higher? I guess I did. So these rankings are made from how I rank the palette throughout the year. I do like rankings all throughout the year, and then at the end of the year, I just combine all of those rankings and make it into one big ranking. This one ranked really high. I will say, I was very surprised by this one. This is the So Elemental palette. Love the pack. Look at that with the water ripple. So pretty. So Elemental palette is a 9-pan palette that is a cool tone palette, but this, I can do this because this is blue. Cool tone blue I like. Cool tone blue I can do. There is one slightly glittery shade here. This one works pretty decently. It's one of the slightly better ones. Do I wish this was just a metallic? Absolutely yes. But I still think that this was a really nice one. I love, again, we have one of those pastel shades with the shimmer in here. This like iridescent topper blue shade, so pretty, really like it. Like the mattes that are in the lower here as well. This is like a almost like a thundercloud gray, and then there is this like we're about to have thundercloud. It's like this grayish blue that honestly looked really striking on my eyes. And again, cool tone blue, that I can do. And I thought this one was a nice palette from Colourpop with a different color, like this undertone that I haven't seen from them before. Now we're getting into another one of the Nomad palettes, and this is the Chicago Speakeasy palette that they came out with this fall. This has more of a softer, almost like velvety. Remember those posters from the 90s that had like the velvet? They feel like that. It's a little bit nostalgic. So this is like, again, it's like a half neutral, half... Is it a half colorful? I don't even know if it is, because I feel like these are like neutral, cool toned mauves and berries, very cool tone. And then we have a green row, and then we have like a neutral row that's leaning a little bit more warmer. I think that this palette is perfectly fine, but it's not my most inspired color story for me from Nomad Cosmetics. I like the quality a lot though. I really like, again, I've been into these. The piece, the neon pastel piece, I love it. So I really like the addition of that color in here. But other than that, this is not my favorite color story from Nomad, even though I like the quality of it. And I feel the same about this one. This is the LH Cosmetics 1993 palette that they did together with Margareta Grass. Really like the quality of this palette. Per usual, LH Cosmetics makes great makeup and Margareta Grass has impeccable taste. This, according to me though, is a little bit more mid-tone than I would like a full palette to be. I would have wanted something here to be even lighter, and I would have liked something here to be even darker. This palette though, together with a matte white and a matte black, that's perfect for me. I just wish that this one or this one went even darker and this one or this one went even lighter. Again, that's a personal preference. I think that when you collab with a brand, you should do what your heart desires. And I'm very excited to see that Maggie did what her heart desires. This is the Calavera palette by Gourmande Girls. This is in celebration of her Mexican heritage. And this is also a little bit of a rainbow palette. I like that it is matte heavy. The reason why this palette has some really amazing shades. It also has some a little bit more hard pressed shades, like this one down here that's a little bit more hard pressed. And also the shimmers in here, this one and this one, are that little bit more flaky texture that on me creases a little bit. Not on everyone, but it does on me. But I really like this palette, and what I really like is the undertone of some of the shades up here, almost like, again, a pastel neon on the eyes. Really did appreciate that. There is a matte white, there is a matte black. You can do a lot of interesting things here, and I like that there's like these like almost grayish leaning, and then there's some brights, there's some almost like neon pastel. There's a lot of different undertones in here. Not my favorite palette from Gourmande Girls, but I still think it's not too big. Like, you can definitely hold this one and do your makeup. I prefer something that's a little smaller, but I did think that this was a fun one. Now we're having one more mainstream palette. As you can see, most of these palettes are indie brands, but It's another one of the Makeup by Mario. This is the Ethereal Eyes Moonlight palette. This is the one that came out for holiday. I gotta say, Makeup by Mario has an amazing shimmer formula. It is so ethereal on the eyes. It's like a very finely milled, it's just very forgiving on the eyes. It does not accentuate texture whatsoever. It does not crease on me. And it's one of those formulas where you can pat on a little bit and get this really nice shimmer, or you can pack it on and make it a little bit more impactful. There is also this like really nice satin in here. The gray is not for me. That's a personal opinion though, but I overall think that this is a really nice palette. There is a blue iridescent, like a blue-green iridescent duochrome here, and a matte blue. Not the best matte blue I've ever tried in my life, but it's definitely workable. You can do something with it. And I gotta say, I'm very impressed with this formula, and I hope to see, like I said, with the other Makeup by Mario palette, I understand that he's like the queen of like neutrals, but I would still love to see him venture out a little bit more when it comes to eyeshadow colors in the future. Maybe 2025 will be the year that we see that, because he did warm tones and now he's doing cool tones. And maybe if we're lucky, we can see something else. Let's hope so. Here's Adept Cosmetics, and this is the Element 115. I think that this color story is really beautiful. Adept Cosmetics is, for me, one of those brands that I really wish that they had even more mattes in their palettes. And again, I say that, and every time I say that, people are like, no, I love that it's the way that they are. They want to have more shimmers than mattes. I will very rarely use more than one shimmer on my eye in a look, but I will always use more than one matte. So for me, for a palette to be truly versatile for me, it needs to have at least a 50-50 split. Otherwise, I am left with doing the same kind of a crease all the time. And I don't like when a palette tells me what kind of look I can do. That's just a personal preference. I do like the color story of this. Like I told you, I love a cool tone blue. It makes me super, super happy. I also think the shimmers in here are really, really fun and impressive. And I will say, sometimes Adept Cosmetics has some shimmers that crease very easily on me. And in this palette, there's only like one or two of those, which makes it a little bit more user-friendly for me. Then we have the Spring Magic by Unearthly Cosmetics. I love Unearthly Cosmetics. This palette has really, really great quality. Love the iridescent shade up here. Love that there's a matte wine. This one though, for me, misses something that's even darker. I would have loved to have something that's just a smidge darker to deepen up with. Again, I understand that it's a spring palette, so this is just a personal preference, but it is a bigger palette. So in a bigger palette like this, I would have loved if one of the shades were just a little bit darker. Maybe this one could have been even darker. Maybe this one could have been even darker. Maybe this brown could have been a really deep brown. Again, personal preference, but overall I think it's a really fun palette. Not my favorite color story from Unearthly Cosmetics, and I do tend to prefer their slimmer, smaller palettes, but that's also me. Okay, have you been here this long that I used to love 4 pans and 6 pans? That used to be my absolute favorite. I used to love small palettes, like truly curated. With time, I have realized that I love a 10, 12, 15, 16 pan. That's my sweet spot. Even a 20 pan. A 20 pan I can really get on board with. What is this one? I think that this is 618. I think that it's a pretty nice, I don't mind it. But I kind of like, I like them to have options. But I also think that when they start having as many as 16, 18, 20, I do need the palette to do even more for me. And I don't want to reach into other palettes to like complete my look. So, I mean, it's very interesting to see like how you change over the years, how your preference changes, what you prefer, what you don't prefer, because I have definitely changed my preferences. I mean, my life altogether. I've been on YouTube almost a decade. So there's definitely been a lot of things that have changed throughout the years that I've been here. And that's truly been, for me, one of the bigger changes. I prefer palettes over singles, and I prefer them to have a smidgen more shades now than I used to. This is one of my favorite neutral palettes that released this year, and this is the Sigma Cool Neutrals palettes. I still have my brush in here. Sigma is one of the few brands where I save the little inserts because their inserts are so cute. So this one is, according to me, a half cool tone, half neutral / warm tone palette. So this is like a palette. It makes the cool tones a little bit more approachable for someone who has a more golden undertone, because this isn't shades that are super easy to blend into my undertone. But I really like this palette. I think the qualities are really good. I think they really up the shimmers in this one. There's a lot of things that I can do with this palette because there are so many different undertones in the mattes. Again, gives me the option to go more yellow, more pinky, more like actually like cool tone if I want to. There are different things that I can do, and I appreciate that. And I think the quality of this palette is really nice. And again, sometimes I really am like, oh, I want to do a neutral look. I'm looking forward to that. And when I feel like that, I usually want something that has a mix of cool tones and warm tones, and I think this one does that for me. This is the Danessa Myricks Groundwork Blooming Romance palette. This is a putty and a powder formula, and I think these formulas are really good. You can use a putty on your own. I feel like it's very similar in formula to the gel to powder matte formula that Danessa Myricks has. This one I would say is maybe a little bit more, you can see a little bit more like a putty in the pan than the Natasha Denona is. I also think that the Natasha Denona one is probably a little bit more pigmented than this one, but this one you can use on the cheeks, your lips, and your eyebrows as well. And overall, I think this is a really nice palette. Again, it goes to really dark to really light. There are some more colorful, like almost like a apricot, a pink, a reddish shade. You can go more colorful, you can go more neutral. This is what I'm talking. I would love to see something like this kind of color story from Makeup by Mario in the formula that he has. I think that he would smash that. I think that that would be really, really interesting, and I would love to see that for next year. I would love to see that. This is the Adept Cosmetics and Amy Loves Makeup. I love Amy, but I don't love cool tones. But I still think that she did a really good job of making cool tones very interesting. Again, this has only 5 mattes, which is the amount of mattes that Adept usually has. And I prefer more mattes in the palette. Personal preference. I also prefer mattes that, again, I just want to have more options with my mattes. I don't want to be like, oh, do you want to do a gray or a blue? I want to be able to have a little bit more like options with my mattes, but the formula is beautiful. This like wet shade up here is so beautiful. And this, like, you can see it's a multi-chrome. It's like, I don't know if you can see that it's a multi-chrome, but it's like a green going to like a purple going to pink. It's a very, very interesting shade that can really elevate your look if you have this palette. And this glam is so high intensity. I think like it almost like blows out because it's so high intensity. So I think the formulas in this one is really interesting. If you love cool tones and you just want to have something that's a little bit more interesting cool tones, I think that you would really appreciate this one, or the Cold Moon one from from Ensley Rain as well. This one has maybe, I prefer blues over pinks, so that's why this one is ranked a little higher. I had so much fun with this one. This is the DD Signature Blooming Basket palette. I think this is the one that it has a good matte formula, but it doesn't have her best matte formula. And this is one of those palettes that I would love to see like re-released in her new that she did in her latest palette, because I love the color story. I love this like green to purple. This is so pretty. It's so interesting. You might look at this and be like, oh, it's a little chaotic, but no, this really goes together really well. There are some really thoughtful combinations in here. So many different things that you can do with this palette, and so many different combinations where you can go. And I really, really think that this is a super fun palette. I think the quality that DD Signature used to have was really nice, and she's improved it even more and more and more, and now I think it's really good. And this is honestly one of those palettes I would love to see this with an updated packaging, updated artwork, and the updated formula, because I thought that this one was such an inspiring color story. It is time for another palette by Blend Money Cosmetics, and this is the collab that they did with Donnie Darkovich. So this is the Little Miss She Never Misses palette. And I overall think that this is a little bit more of a curated color story. It is not as big as the other one. I do appreciate the colors that have gone in here, and I like that she did a couple of more shimmers than Blend Money usually does. The thing that I think takes this palette from being an absolute hit into something that's like, it's a good one but not perfect, is that there are some shades here that I am gonna be totally honest with you, I think they're too similar. These two shimmers here, they are too similar. This whole green row here, yes, if I swatch them out, they're not exactly the same, but I think they're too similar to each other, especially on the eyes. I don't understand why the 4 matte greens are so close to each other. I think that either skip 2 of them and just do 2 totally different colors, or make some of them darker or lighter or different undertone. I just don't think that, according to me, I think that that's a missed opportunity in a palette like this, to have that many shades that are quite honestly too similar. That's just my personal preference or opinion about that though. But overall, this is a really nice quality palette. I just think there are a couple of shades that are just too similar. This one is the Melted Mattes palette. So when you see this palette and I opened this palette, this one I have actually added some of the molten chromes in here, and I'm actually not even ranking that one because it was just a little 6-pan slim palette with these shimmers that are in here. Personally, I prefer this palette when I've changed it, when I've put in the shimmers as well, because again, I don't mind a big matte palette, and as you can see, this one actually ranks pretty high. The reason why it ranks pretty high is because I love the Bella Beauté bar formula. This one has like neutrals and colorful shades, and it goes from really light to really dark, so I can do a bunch of different looks just with this palette, just with the mattes, if that is what I want. But again, I don't think that we need that big of, I think they would have been better off just making with the shimmers that they had, put it in the palette and just doing almost all matte palette. But again, I think the quality of the Bella Beauté bar mattes are amazing. I'm just not 100% sure that it was the best decision to do one matte palette and then one just 6-pan slim with the shimmers. Again, personal preference. This is from Clarity Cosmetics, and this is the Forbidden Love palette. I really like the color story of the front, and it's the same on the back here. And then inside, this was the first time that I tried Clarity Cosmetics, and I actually, as I'm filming this, I'm actually getting a PR package from them, I think in a couple of days, which is really interesting for me to start getting some PR and trying even more things from them. I like that this palette has lighter colors, darker colors, are different formulas in the shimmers. I did not have any problems with creasing with this one. If I could choose something with this one, I maybe would have made like a couple, like some of these are a little bit similar to each other, but overall I think this is a really, really nice palette, and I especially love the pop of these like almost like dainty pastels at the bottom with the really dark, grungy, almost gothy like purples and blues up here. I think the contrast is really good, and I like the looks that I've did. So overall, I think that that was a really interesting palette. Now we're getting into the Ultimate Cappuccino palette by DD Signature. I had so much fun with this palette. These are my kind of neutrals. You know, when they have a little bit of color to them, they're leaning a little bit, like I can mix with the browns, the yellows, and the oranges to make them more warmer if I want to. There is a light one, there is a dark one, and the shimmers are incredible. This orange right here is so beautiful. So I had really fun with this palette. I really did enjoy it. Now we're getting into one of the quads by Game Beauty. They sent me a bunch of these quads. It's in collaboration with Attack on Titan, and I only use one of the quads, which is the orange and yellow one. This is my jam. You're gonna see another one of those mini palettes with orange and yellow and brown together, or just yellow and brown together, has been one of my absolute favorite combos these past 2 years. I've never thought that I could be a person who loves browns, but together with yellows, I am absolutely sold, and I really like the quality of this quad. I think the yellow is actually bright enough together with the brown to give me the contrast that I need. The shimmer here is a yellow to orange, and it's beautiful. Quality is nice, it's small and easy to travel with. I actually really enjoy that one. I think it's really beautiful. Here is the Unearthly Charmer palette. This one I think has really good quality, but I do think that this color story is not my absolute favorite from the brand. I think a couple of these shades are a little bit too similar. I kind of wish that one of them would have been even lighter. And I also don't know if I think that this green makes sense in here. But I think the quality is really nice. I just wish that this one would have had even more contrast in it. I think this was the Valentine's mystery box, right? I think the quality is really good. It's just not my absolute favorite color story from Unearthly, but it's one of those that it's, for me, it's better as a companion palette together with something else. Now we have the collaboration between Steph's Beauty Stash and Gourmande Girls, and this is the Nueva Vida palette. I have to preface this palette by saying I love colors. I love interesting color stories. I love unusual color stories. And this is a color story that I have never seen before. These are neons. I think you can see if I put it down here, neon shadows. Love the mix of neons, pastels, really dark jewel tones. The shimmers are so fun and impactful, and I've never seen anything like this before. It is so interesting and fun, and I really do enjoy it. With that being said, I have heard some people saying this was a little bit too chaotic for them, but if you love colors, this could be a perfect addition to your collection because I don't think you have anything like this in your collection. This is the Metamorph palette by Arttitude Cosmetics. I think the formula of this one is so beautiful. The color story, there are so many combinations to be had here, but I think when I open up this palette, it is a little bit jumbled up, and I almost think that this green is making it look a little bit too like, not overbearing, but like almost like a little overwhelmed. I still think it's a beautiful shadow though. I just think that the way that this palette is put out, like some people love jumbled up color stories like this one. Some people like a gradient. Some people like when they are like a strict gradient. I like myself when I do eyeshadow palettes, because I've done a couple now, I like putting the shadows, and I did that all the way back to Club Nebula, which was in 2020. I like putting the shadows in a way that like, if you use these shadows together, you'll have a look. But you can also use it with the corresponding shadows. Like I like putting them out together with shadows so it's easy to use if that is something that you need help with. So it looks appealing when you open the palette, and the shadows that work together are next to each other. Which again, of course, rules are meant to be broken, but I think it makes it easy on the eyes. This one is a little bit more jumbled up, and I think that this green here in this jumbled up design just makes it a little bit almost like it's too much. But overall, I think Arttitude Cosmetics has an amazing formula. Here we have the Dreamer palette by Arttitude Cosmetics. I know this is a bunch of people's favorite palette by Arttitude Cosmetics. This one is a smidgen too cool tone for my liking, but it's only this gray one here, if I'm gonna be totally honest. There are some really nice undertones here. Slightly blue, slightly purple, slightly mauve pink. Really nice, goes from light to dark. The shimmers are so beautiful. This purple here, it's so pretty. It's like a pinky lavender. Very, very yummy. I'm pretty sure that this one is part of the permanent range. It's really pretty though. This packaging is so stunning. This is the Nomad Cosmetics New Zealand Stargazing palette. This one came out early this year, and this is like a dual tone palette. Again, there has been a lot of palettes this year. There has been like the purple, blue, pink, gray. Something along those, either all four of them or at least three of the four. And this one and the Dreamer palette, you've seen a couple of palettes like that. You're catching on. And I think that this one is really good quality. It's not my absolute favorite color story from Nomad Cosmetics. This shade here though, it is this like peachy, fiery peachy multi-chrome topper. It's so beautiful. There are some multi-chromes in here. I think you can see when I'm like, it's really impressive shades in here. Again, some of these gray, like gray leaning browns, also not my absolute favorite, but there are some really nice blue and pinks in here, and I love it. The Nomad Cosmetics Polar Express is the palette that they came out with for this kind of like Christmas season. And this one has things that I really like, really light to really dark. I love white shades in here. It has a bunch of blues. I love this shade here and some neutrals. Me personally, I like when the red is even brighter red than this, but I think overall that this color story is a really nice one. Not my favorite from Nomad this year. I have another palette that's coming up in a bunch that I love so much, but the looks that I've done with this, absolutely incredible. I have a look filmed on YouTube with this one. Absolutely love it. Any of these palettes, by the way, I'm sure that if you search for these palettes on my channel, you will find so much content, because I have done looks with pretty much all of these either on Instagram or here on YouTube. Here is the Cyborg Choir, and I think this might be the most interesting color story that I think Adept Cosmetics has ever done. Here we have something where I'm gonna be totally honest with you, this isn't the best matte formula that Adept Cosmetics has ever done. And some of these shades, they have holographic shimmer in them, but they're a little flaky and they're a little emollient, and they do tend to crease on me a little bit. But I will look past that. I will build the mattes up even more, and I will tap out the creases, because I love this color story with the bright, almost like marker yellow with the almost jewel tones and the interesting undertones and this bright green. It's just an incredible color story. I think it's so beautiful. But again, Adept Cosmetics, I really wish that they would perfect their mattes. And also then, of course, some of the shimmers do crease on me, but they don't crease on everyone. So I think that's just me having this really deep hood here that just messes it up sometimes. Here is one of the NC Rain mini palettes. As I'm filming this, I have only tried two of the right now available mini palettes. The Fox one, I'll do something with that one soon. I'll include it in next year's ranking, but I do think that that color story might be my favorite. This one is a more cohesive color story than the other one we're going to talk about, which is the squirrel one. But I like the squirrel color story more because the mattes are so good. They're so good. Do like this. If you love a peachy neutral and you want to have just a small 6-pan palette, quality is incredible. These shadows really work together in a really nice way. There are so many combinations you could be had with this. And NC Rain, like I've said before, has a really nice formula that I really love. Nomad Cosmetics did a green palette this year. This one is starting to get a little dusty because it has that like, not a velvet, but like a soft fabric cover. And this is the Iceland Wild Atlantic Way. And this is a green palette. I really like the undertones here. A couple of the shades are a little bit similar. Again, with this big of a palette, maybe there could have been one more brown or one more of these like more leaning a little bit more tealy, because some of these greens here are maybe a little similar, but I gotta be honest, I love that they really went green. It's grass green. It's so bright. It's so fun. I love the looks that I've done. I think this is a really nice quality and I think it's really fun. I love this like warm olivey green metallic up here. It's so pretty. So overall, I really like this palette. And if you love green, I'm sure you're gonna like this one too. Here is the Natasha Denona Golden palette. This is really nice quality. It is a really good neutral palette. It goes from light to really dark. This is a cream to powder, an incredible like bone colored cream to powder shadow. I do wish that there would have been a little bit of a twist to this because it is very brown golden neutral. I think the quality is great though. The shadows look really beautiful on the eyes. I just think that one of these 4 shades could have been something else, and one of these golds could have been that lime chrome that they had in the gold palette. I just think it's a missed opportunity to not have just a corner of these two. Let 2 shades just be the little like twist to it. I think they should have made one of these a mustard, and I think they should have made one of these golds. Honestly, I think they should have made it the lime chrome because I think that would have taken this palette to the next level. But I can't deny, packaging is beautiful, formula is beautiful, the looks are beautiful. I just think that they lost a little bit of the essence of the original gold palette with this golden palette. It lost the thing that people really loved about it, which is that it was a different neutral palette. This is a good neutral palette, but there's nothing else to it. This is the Archeo palette. This is the 3rd one that I told you about with the Cleonut palettes. And this is again also a re-release of the original color story. I do think again also that this one would have benefited from a little bit of an update. I think that they should have thought about a little bit more in 2024. When people think about green, yellow, brown, rosy, peachy brown with a pop of blue, what do people want? And I think that they could have updated the color story just a smidgen and made it even better. With that being said, love these shades. This like lemony yellow shimmer here, it's so incredibly good. And I love what I've done with this palette. And this is a very interesting neutral palette. I just think that they could have made it even more interesting. Because like I said, yellow with brown has been one of my favorite color combos. It's an unexpected color combo for me because I am not the biggest fan of browns, but here I am singing the praise of brown together with yellow. Apparently it's a new thing that I love. This one has an actual hair stuck to it. Sexy. This is the Cosmic Dreamer by Endlessly Rain. Overall, I think that the quality of this palette is absolutely beautiful. This is also a re-release, and I think the same here. This palette has incredible shadows. The only reason why this one is ranked the way that it is that you can get these shadows in more interesting color stories from other NC Rain palettes, and I don't 100% know why they released this palette when they have the Strawberry Moon, when they have the Twisted Tea Party. Like, did we need this one too? When you already have those 2 palettes that I think are better and more interesting and better curated, did we need this one too? With that being said, it's a beautiful palette, but it's another one of those palettes is trying to do everything and it ends up doing just a little bit too much of everything. Nothing wrong with the quality. This is just me comparing this palette to other things that I already know and have and love even more from NC Rain. Here is the Unearthly Cosmetics and Night Terror palette, and this was the Halloween mystery box that came out this year. This is such a beautiful 9-pan palette. I really enjoy this shades. I think it is the shimmers make sense, the mattes make sense. You can go purple, you can go pink, you can go a little bit more muted, or you can go a little bit more like bright if you want to. This iridescent like blue topper shade is beautiful. These see that like purple blue? So beautiful. I think they did such a good job with this palette. I think it is beautiful. I don't remember, I think it is Midnight Serenade, this one from Lethal Cosmetics. This one for me is, okay, this is a palette I think is a neutral palette for a color lover and a colorful palette for a neutral lover. And I think they did a really good job with this one. It is maybe a little bit more darker and muted than I prefer in palettes. Like I would have wished that we had one more light shade than this. Personal preference again. It's a little bit moody, but also it is Midnight Serenade, so I think that makes perfect sense. But I think the shadows in here are absolutely beautiful. I like this packaging a lot. I do wish they put the name on the packaging. That's just a personal preference though. Here we are, and this is the Silent Night palette by Gourmande Girls. This is the holiday palette for last year. Again, this is one of those palettes that I reviewed and tried after the ranking I did last year, so I'm including it here. And this I think is a more updated version of a yellow and blue and brown, because it is a little bit more poppy. There's a little bit more depth and dimension in it. There is a very nice iridescent shade. I think that this palette I had a lot of fun with it. I also like the inclusion of this, it's not a silver per se, it's almost like a tarnished silver with this little weird undertone. Overall, I just think that this palette is really interesting and really fun. Will say though, I love this year's holiday palette from Gourmande Girls even more, and that one will be in a bit. I feel like I've been sitting here for 200 hours filming this, but I mean I haven't, but it is starting to feel like that. We have another Bella Beauté bar palette. This is the Vamp palette, and I am sure that you are going to find this palette as the top palette for some people this year. And this is the reason why it's not my top palette. This has also been a color story that we have seen a lot this year. And that is the red, purple, and gray. Again, not my absolute favorite when it comes to the grays in here. I do love red and purple together though, and I love the Bella Beauté bar formula. So overall, I think this is a beautiful color story. It's just that a couple of these shades are like throwaway shades for me, and I love red and purple, but it's not my absolute favorite. And also like now we're starting to get into where like these palettes are like really good palettes, and we're just like I'm starting to split hairs, even though you're probably looking at the number and you're like, what do you mean starting to split hairs? We're like what, halfway through, but they're all pretty good now. Okay, they're all pretty good. Love this palette, but not as much as some of the other ones we're going to talk about. Same with this one. This is the Unearthly Just a Taste palette. And I also think that this will probably be the favorite palette for some people as well. And this is a holiday Halloween palette, or almost like merging together, because it has that like red-green color story. It's almost like a grungy, old vampire thing. Love a lot of the colors in here. For me, I would have liked to have another one like really light in here, but there are some shimmers in here. This one in particular that I did look with, so beautiful. This one here is so pretty as well. It's like this wet look. Also these like tarnished, like olivey, like old grass. Love shades like this. Overall, I think this is a really good color story. Again, personally, I prefer the Unearthly palettes that are a little slimmer, also because Unearthly has like bigger pans. But I do think that that one is really good. Here are the newer palettes by Arttitude Cosmetics. I think that these have really fun color stories. These are called the urban neutrals and the vintage neutrals. And overall, I think that calling these neutrals might have been pushing it a little bit, because is this neutrals? Not really. Do really love this color story though. Will say these shadows are maybe pressed a little bit too loosely, so you end up getting a lot of fallout. And this shadow, when you poke it, it's almost like it's turning into like a loose shadow in the pan. So a couple of these shades might have been benefited from being a little bit more harder pressed, but overall I think the color story is just really fun and impressive. And it's the same with this vintage neutral. Maybe I like the other color story more than this one, even though you know I love a warm color story, but I think that one makes more sense than this one. Although this shadow here though, this like red with a like purple green duochrome topper, so pretty. And also this like, what do I call this, like it's like a dark soil brown metallic. It is a little bit flaky though, but applying this with your finger makes such an impressive like smoky eye, and you know I love a mustard. So overall I think these are really interesting. Again, they're laid out a little bit more chaotic and random, which is the way that Arttitude Cosmetics does it. Not my favorite, but I really like these color stories, and I like them even better than what they had before. This is the Bella Beauté Bar and Sassy Fairy Realm of Fairies palette. This is a really, really fun palette. Again, I love cool tones if it's blue. I think that this palette, personally, I would have loved to see a dark purple in here so that you could deepen up with the deep purple as well. So you could go all purple, or you could go all blue, or you could go more smoky with the gray. There's even more options. I would say the biggest, I'm using flaw very loosely here with this palette, is that I think that some of these formulas are too flaky to the point when there's actually a little bit hard to even swatch them. And I think that they look amazing in the palette, but I had some problems using some of these shades. And again, I'm not saying I'm an eyeshadow pro, but I'm an advanced user, and I love Bella Beauté Bar's formula, and I think some of these shimmers could have benefited from being a little bit less flaky. Oh my god, my hair. A little bit less flaky and a little bit less emollient. Another one of the red, purple, and gray palettes. This is the Sinister palette from Cosmic Beauty. This one is the one that is part of their mystery box. So if you don't want to see what's in the mystery box, I'm showing you the palette right here. But here you have purple, gray, and red. There's also a cream shadow in here. You can see my fingerprint in here. It's like almost like a glitter glue, like sticky tacky. It is called Ghost, and quite honestly, I just think for the memes, honestly, like for the plot, I think it's so fun to have this like see-through gloss in here that's called Ghost, because this was a Halloween mystery box. The quality is incredible, and this, it is such a nice finely milled with a little bit of a holographic feel to it. I think overall this is absolutely stunning. Is this my favorite palette from Cosmic Beauty? No, because it's leaning in that direction. That's not absolutely my favorite, but I love Cosmic Beauty's formula, and if you look at this and you're like yes, 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 I'm sure you would love it. Here's the Gourmande Cosmetics Barely Basics. This is another neutral palette that I thought was really good this year, and this one, I think this is so smart. There are lighter mattes, mid-tone, darker in like taupe, olive green, like a warm brown, and then almost like this mauve, and then a dark berry, and then there are iridescent topper shades and really nice metallics. This one has a little bit of a multichrome gold to green, and here I think the green to gold to red multichrome makes sense in this palette because there is reddish and green in here, so you can utilize and make that really like work with this palette. I think this one is such an interesting take on a neutral palette, and I really, really did enjoy this one. Oden did a second collab, a Legendary Diversa collab with Annette and Tina from the Fancy Face and Judy, and I think that they did such a fun and interesting job. I personally, my favorite is the Judy palette. This one has this really fun shade down here that is just so interesting, and this one is the Mighty Monster palette that Annette did. Very colorful and fun. I love these two shades together. I wish this one had something that was a little bit darker, but this pastel palette that Judy did, this is my favorite. This is I think the only pastel palette that Oden has ever done. There is a darker shade here if you want to deepen it up a bit. Quite honestly, I think this is so fun. And I love the pastel shades from Oden, so I think it's so smart of her to just do pastels, because I think they do pastels really well. I had a lot of fun with this one. I'm loving, again, these like pea pastel greens are just so interesting to me, so I think they did a really good job with that one, even though it's not my absolute favorite palettes from Oden. This is the Fantasy Cosmetic Wizard palette, and I love me a good wizard. Love the yellow and the blue color story with this like vanilla, and then there is an almost white. This is a white with a slight blue undertone, which is so effective and so cool. And then there is a light blue, two darker ones. This one is like a purple. You can see a purple to blue with a lot of holographic shimmer in it. A very impressive one. And I think that this is so fun. And if you love blue eyeshadows and you want to have like a blue palette with a twist, This one is really fun. This is the Lethal Cosmetics. This is the latest palette that they came out with, and this is called the Spellcraft palette. This one actually does have the name on it on the back. Thank you so much. I do love that. It has a button to open it, and it opens up like a book. And I really enjoy the shadows in here. Dang, these swatch so amazingly and they look so good on the eyes. I love the silver in the middle. There is like berries, there is cool tones, there is warm tones. Again, we're having this little resurgence of like the blue, purple, gray. I told you there's a lot of those color stories going around, but I think they executed this so well. And this iridescent like lime green that's at the top as well, such a fun shade. I just think that this is really beautiful. And I love that they included a bunch of different shimmer formulas in here. I think this is stunning. Simply Posh Cosmetics is a brand that doesn't release a lot of things, but when they do, they release really fun things. And this is the Coastal palette that they came out with this year. And this one has a really interesting color story because it's a little bit muted. There are some like sun and beach and sand colors in here. I do wish that one of these colors went a little lighter for even more contrast, but the shimmers are beautiful. The mattes are so stunning. I love this. It's more than sea foam. It's like an almost bright sea foam. It's such an interesting color. I really enjoy this, and I love this over here as well. It just gives such a nice like neutral corner to a somewhat colorful palette, and I think they did a really good job with this one. I think it's really fun, and overall Simply Posh Cosmetics, like I said, they do really interesting things. I have gotten so many questions asking me if I was going to include that, like I said, the old palettes from last year in this year's ranking, the ones that weren't able to be ranked in last year's video. And one of the ones that I am including that I really love, that I'm so happy to be able to talk about again, is the Glamlight and Garfield palette. This is so good, and I feel like sometimes when Glamlight does a collab really well with a great formula, great packaging, innovative, good color stories, I feel like they're almost like going under the radar a little bit. And I feel like this palette did not get the hype that it deserved. So this one is a very warm color story with a hint of a blue down here. And this one here, I think you can see, it's like a almost blue purple to gold, like duochrome. It's very interesting. Quite honestly, this palette is a stunner. It's bright and it's neutral. It has a twist to it. It's really fun. The quality is amazing. The artwork is so good. The palette is beautiful. One of my favorite palettes from Glamlight. I think they did really good with this one. This is the Ensley Rain Flutter palette. And they did do a duo with the Flutter and the Flourish. And I have been absolutely loving the Flourish palette. You'll see that in quite a bit. And this one is the more moody sister to Flourish. And I will say, really beautiful shades. I think this palette is stunning. I love this shade over here. I love that there's an unexpected pop over here. The only thing that I would say is to the negative side to this one is that a couple of these shimmers are a smidgen too similar to each other. Probably would benefit from having something that was, again, something that was a pop like this one that was just a little bit different. But overall, I think that this palette is beautiful and the shimmers are stunning. And I did travel with this one because I think it is beautiful. And Earthly Cosmetics also came out with the Gargoyle palette. Again, it's another one of those bigger palettes. Unearthly had quite a few palettes this year. And this one is a really nice color story. This one has more blue-green. The pastel greens. Don't clock me on the amount of times that I've said that I love that. I'm just really into that. I also love this top corner here. I did such a beautiful neutral look with that. Again, it is this slight gray cast over it, but somehow when it comes to blues, I am so okay with that. I'm like, this is beautiful. I'm loving it. And there also is a bright blue in here. I just think that this palette is really pretty, really stunning. And I've had really fun with it. And look at these two shades here. I'm a sucker for that. Now we are getting into my friend Amanda's palette with Fantasy Cosmetica. This is the Enchanted Autumn palette. This one has these really like moody, grungy, almost like fall, but not that happy fall with like the bright oranges and reds and yellows. This is like when stuff is starting to, you know, go a little bit south, when stuff is starting to like turn and really get a little bit more grungy and moldy. And I love the undertone of this. I personally prefer when you get a little bit more contrast in the palette, but me and Amanda do our makeup very, very differently. She is more of a one color in the crease, one color on the lid. And quite honestly, the quality of these shades are absolutely stunning. And it's so true to her makeup aesthetic. And if you like this color story, you are gonna love the quality because the quality is beautiful. Also, do not clock me on the amount of times that I said that I love yellow and browns, but that is one of the main reasons why this one is so high. This is the Nothing by Nature by NC Rain. Again, all of these shadows, top-notch quality, absolutely love it. Love these two shades, love these two shades. This is a taupe that still doesn't look totally gray on me, which I love. These two shades are incredible quality, but I personally, myself, would have picked different colors in here. If this palette had come with two different shimmers in here, this would probably have been top 5. I'm gonna be totally honest with you. Again, I told you just recently that I'm not as much into quads and six pans, but if there is a really great quad or six pan that comes my way, I will fall in love very easily. And I love yellow with brown, loving the concept of this one. I love how cute it is, and I am very excited to see what other ones are coming. Like I said, I haven't tried the Fox one yet. That color story is so beautiful. It's like a foresty neutral green, real pretty as well. But yeah, this one, the mattes are just, they're just what I really like. This is the Gourmande Girls Peach Perfect palette. I absolutely really love this palette. And there are some really interesting bright shades in here. This one is so impactful. This one is so impactful. This peach metallic, absolutely beautiful. I love that there are light shades. I love that there are deep shades. And I really love this one. How I would have made this even better is if this brown was even darker. That's just a personal preference. I also love the inclusion of these more cool tones, almost minty shades, because like it goes with the palette, but also gives you the option to do something totally different if you want to. And I just think that this palette is beautiful. And I think Gourmande Girls, they've just come so far, and I'm just so excited to see all the things that they have going on. This is the Rosy Jingle palette by Oden. This is one of the holiday palettes of this year. And this is so bright and fun. It has the yellows, it has the pinks. It's just so bright. And this is one of my most favorite neutral shimmers that I have in my collection. It's a peach with almost a wet look shimmer to it. So your eyes just look like wet and glossy, but it's still an eyeshadow and it doesn't crease on me. Absolutely love it. This palette to me is a companion palette. But it is such a fun companion palette, and I just love these shades. And me personally, I love the Oden quality. I just think this is super fun, and I love this little lavender down here and this wet look and the yellow. Absolutely yum. I was really surprised at how nice I thought the Sugar palette by ABH was. This is how it looks. It's almost like a neutral palette with some pastels and a little pop of like a rosy pink mauve undertone. Really think that this is interesting. I love how many different formulas they were able to get into this palette and how nice it performs. And I was just very impressed with this one. I thought this palette was really nice. It feels very high quality. And again, I didn't buy that many like mainstream palettes this year, and I'm excited that I'm like at least loving most of the ones that I bought. Not all of them, but most of the ones. This is the Robert Welsh and Nomad Cosmetics Divination palette, and I think that he did so good. I think that he was able to get in like a bunch of really nice undertones in that concept that Bonboni has with the gradient going light, medium, dark. This is such an again, I love yellow and brown, but it's such an interesting undertone because it is a brown and a bright yellow and like it almost pale lemon. The green has this really nice, almost yellow leaning undertone. This like peachy brown row is really nice. This isn't my favorite row, but again, I don't really care. I also love that he has more shimmers in here than Bonboni usually does. Again, I love a matte heavy palette, but if it's going to be this big, at least put even more shimmers. I also really like the neutral shadows in here. I think he was able to bring in some really interesting neutral shimmers in here that is like almost like a chocolatey brown metallic with like almost silver like wet look shimmer in there. Very interesting. Bonboni also had a Longing palette this year, and this is a cool tone palette that I actually really appreciate. It has like the moody purples and these like sea foam and like cool tone like like olives over here. I think this is really pretty. These taupes here do turn a little gray on me, especially on these grays, of course, as well. And I think the shimmers are really impactful and really complement these shades and still work with other rows. Like you don't have to use this row. This shimmer will work with other rows as well. And I really appreciate that too. I think this is a really, like one of my favorite cool tone palettes in my collection, I think, because it gives a bunch of different variety. With that being said, I'm super intrigued to see what 2025 will be for Blend Bunny and what kind of different color stories they're going to be bringing. Because I do really hope that we're able to see other kind of concepts as well. I would love to see another one of those like all done up palettes, those like slightly smaller ones. That I would love to see. I might have messed up some of the ranking here in the middle, but I'm very sure about the ranking of these ones that are coming now. These are absolutely in the right order, and nothing felt inherently wrong when I held them up. Because sometimes when I filled these ranking, I've been like, wait, this doesn't belong here, but I didn't feel that during this. So maybe I did. I honestly don't know. Listen, at least they're somewhat in the order that I think. At least the ones that I like the least were in the beginning, and the ones I like the most are at the end. If there's anyone that's jumbled up in the middle of all of it, I don't think it matters that much. Now we're actually getting to two palettes where I was contemplating, I'm like, which ones are actually my favorite? And that is going to be, I'm going to put the Roxa palette here, the Natasha Denona Roxa palette. And I actually really like this palette. I think it is a really nice palette. And if this would have been a year where indie palettes were not absolutely killing it with quality, color story, ideas, execution, all of it, this would have been way higher. If this had been 2 years ago, this would have been top 3. But indie brands have been killing it, and I just cannot put this any higher than this, but know that I actually really like this. And I think this is my favorite mainstream palette of the year. I think it's really hard to make good matte purples, especially in mainstream. And I think it's interesting with these muted reds and pinks, but almost a little bit of grayscale on them together with it. And I think the shimmers are beautiful. I think just there's variation. And why I was hesitating is because the next one I'm going to rank is the Ultraviolet by Deandra Nicole, the collab that she did with Bella Beauté Bar. And what I will say, there are things that I love or prefer with the Roxa palette, and there are things that I prefer with the Ultraviolet palette. I prefer the Bella Beauté Bar formula. I also prefer there are more purple options in this one. But what I also really love about the Roxa palette is that the Roxa palette has a little bit more variation in what kind of looks you can do. This is a purple palette. This has purples, it has pinks, it has reds. You can do more looks. And overall, I do like that. This one also goes a little bit lighter than this one, and again, that's just a personal preference, but I think that I like the quality of this one more, but I like the versatility maybe a little bit more with the Roxa palette. So I think that's just like maybe a personal preference, but I did end up ranking the Ultraviolet a little higher than the Roxa palette, but I think overall both of them are really, really good palettes. Here is the Frozen Kiss palette by Gourmande Girls. This is the holiday palette of this year. This just has such a fun color story. Again, it is, you open it up and you're like, oh, it's a little bit like snow themed, it's a little bit winter themed, but there is variation. There's a muted pink, there's a mint, there's a lavender, so like really bright purple, and then there's some muted darker colors. The shimmers are so impactful and fun. And I think overall this is a very interesting and diverse and flexible color story while still sticking to the theme really well. Even more in the color story of like the purple and the pink, and instead of having the grays, this one has brown and yellow, and you know I love that. So this is the Moon Wish 2. I think it is called Solmåne 2, the Moon Wish palette by Oden's Eye. This is one of my favorite Oden's Eye palettes of this year. I think it's just beautiful, and you can go neutral with this one. You can go bright and purple. You open this up and you think like, oh, that's a blue palette, but there is actually way more things going on here. And just as I feel with the Frozen Kiss, I feel like this one gives you some options to go in different directions if that is what you want. And this has truly been the year where Fantasy Cosmetica has just been giving me all the things that I want. And this is the Cradled in Ice palette. And I really love that they were able to do a 12 pan palette. And I feel like this is the updated version of a neutral palette with a pop of blue, because half of the palette is blue, half of the palette is a neutral leaning a little pinky. There's some really interesting shades in here. The only thing that I would maybe change if I could to make this be even higher is to exchange one or two of the shimmers to something totally different, because they're not the same. These are not dupes, but maybe they're a little bit too close to each other to warrant having all of them in the same palette. But with that being said, dang, this palette is so pretty and I really, really, really enjoy it. And this is the Nomad Fuji 5 Lakes palette. This packaging, this feels like an oil painting. It's truly one of the most exceptional packagings I've ever seen in my life. It's so impressive. And everyone that I talked to that I've had like seen this packaging in real life, we're all saying the same thing. We're like, how did they do this? How is it so impressive? So the inside of the palette is actually a really, really interesting color story. Again, yellow and browns. I love blues. I love reds. Think this is such an interesting and just different color story. And Nomad has this way of making different color stories, and sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. If I could change anything in this palette, I would exchange one of the metallic blues that I think is maybe a smidgen too similar to each other to a dark brown to make this color story work together even more. But with that being said, dang, this is a really nice palette and I love how it looks. And I love that they have this like almost like a peach metallic in here that just looks like a wet look on my eyes. I think it's beautiful. This is another collab that I feel like a lot of people were sleeping on, and this is the Betty Boop collab with Glamlight. This one came out, I want to say around Valentine's Day. And first when I opened this palette, I'm like, oh, it's a red monochromatic palette. But I think the background of this palette is like it's almost like playing in mind tricks with us, because we're thinking that all the shades are like red. But quite honestly, this palette again has some different options. There is another one of those like wet look peaches in here. There is browns, mauves, pinks, and they're all reds, of course. And this is the amazing Glamlight formula. Dang, this is so good. The formula is so great in this one. I might honestly think that this is the best quality that Glamlight has ever had, is in this palette right here. They really nailed the formula here. And I don't hear a lot of people talking about this palette, but oh, it's such a good palette and I absolutely love it. I mean, hands down, I love all the palettes that I'm gonna mention and have mentioned for a bit. Like I said, this year has truly been the year of like exceptional palettes. It's actually kind of crazy. This is another palette that could have been top 5 if it had been a little bit more curated. And this is the Secret Garden by Bella Beauté Bar. Again, I love Bella Beauté Bar's formula. Such a beautiful formula. And there are some like exceptional colors in here. I mean, how I told you that I love shades like this, I also really like that there are some neutrals in here. And I did a neutral look with this palette and I absolutely loved it. I would maybe have taken one row off and made this palette a little smaller. And I don't necessarily know if I mean this row here, but I would have curated this down a little bit, maybe gotten rid of one of the pink, maybe one of the browns, maybe 2 of the greens, just gotten rid of 5 shades and made it a smidgen smaller. This shade here I've reached into several times. I've reached into have this one several times. There are some really exceptional shades in here that are so beautiful. I just kind of wish that this one would have been a smidgen more curated, but it is absolutely stunning. The quality is so good. And this is the kind of format that I would have wished for that one. If the Secret Garden have been as big as Dead Roses, it would have been top 5. This one is beautiful. It is a pink, purple, red, almost like, I love these 2 shades down here, like almost like a berry red dried blood kind of a situation, and then this like blackened purple down here. The shimmers are truly extraordinary. This one it's a red to a dark foresty green multichrome. It is so incredible. Like overall, this palette is beautiful, and you can go in different directions. You can go a little bit more neutral if you keep it over here. You can go red, pink, purple. There are options, and I really love this one. And again, 16 pans. I mean, you already know 16 pans are my sweet spot, but I'm just like, this is the kind of format that I would like to see even more from Bella Beauté Bar, doing this big ones, this size of palettes. I filmed for too long. I'm not even making sense. Oden's Eye usually releases really nice holiday palettes, and this year my favorite was the one that was called Silvery Bliss. And this one also has like a sticker on it. Again, I'm using some post-its to really try to make this make sense. And this one has a really nice color story. And again, I love pink with red as well. And I really like these colors. And I love this metallic red down here. I did such a beautiful look with that one. I just really, really, really loved it. And I also think that this one, together with the holiday palette that they came out with this year, the one I talked about before, the bright yellow and bright pink one, they make really beautiful looks together. And I just think they did a really good job with this one. There are some neutrals, like this rose gold metallic is killer. There is a brown, there's a black, there's dark reds. I love red eyeshadow. I'm a little bit biased because I love red eyeshadow. So when I see really good red eyeshadows, which these are, I'm like, okay, I'm listening. I just think that it has all the things that I need. Dark shades, light shades, metallics, different kinds of metallics, really nice mattes. I think it's beautiful. But even more, I love the High Temp by Unearthly. Gosh, I love warm shades, and this one has like pastel, bright, the bright red, and then has like the muted, almost like a pinky. The sunset of this one is just extraordinary. It's leaning a little bit more matte heavy than some of the other palettes from Unearthly, which also makes the price a little bit more approachable. And I just think that this is beautiful. If you love warm shades, I love this palette. I had so much fun with this one, and I kind of just want to do like, again, just a matte look with these shades. It just makes me so happy, and I really, really like this one. NC Rain also released the Groovy Garden this year, and this is a really beautiful palette, and this one is one of my favorite palettes from NC Rain. Again, this has maybe a smidgen too many shades than what I like, but at least the pans are a little bit smaller, so the palette becomes a little bit easier to hold and store. This one has more mattes than it has shimmers, which I really love. And these shades over here, especially these three here and this one here, so incredible, so impactful. And I love that they're so different from each other, and you can take the looks in so many different ways. There are some cool tone greens. There are some more like grungy, like warmer neutrals down here with like a yellow undertone, which I really enjoy as well. Darker shades, lighter shades. This is a really, really nice palette, and it's not necessarily super warm toned, but it's also not a cool tone palette. It has this beautiful, like almost neutral undertone when it comes to a lot of the mattes. They also quite recently released Light in Your Eyes palette, which I think is such an interesting neutral palette. And again, it's one of those palettes that I look at this and I'm like, oh, it's a neutral palette. But I understand that if you mostly wear browns, this may be a little bit more colorful than what you're used to, but it has like the berries, the mustard, the greens. I love the mauve tones. There are some like more grayish taupey tones over here, browns, and the shimmers are just so impactful. Like, I can't even explain to you how impactful they are. So fun, so just reflective. Again, if you love neutrals and you want to add something, a special neutral palette to your collection, this could be it. Or the neutral palettes that Cosmic Beauty came up with. I will say though, I actually prefer the neutrals ones because it is more warm toned. And again, I love that. Here we have another one of those red to green duochromes. Such a beautiful shade, absolutely stunning. There are some special shades in here. The mustards here are just so scrumptious and yummy. So there are like olives, browns, a little bit of berry mauve, and then mustards. To me, this is just a spicy neutral palette, an interesting neutral palette. I think it's so fun. The Cool Tones palette is the kind of cool tones that I will do, which is pinks and blues. This again might be slightly less neutral than the other palette because it is leaning a little bit more in the blue scales. Of course, I won't lean into the grays that much, but for me, again, the reason why I love this so much is because it says it's a cool tone palette, but it's doing cool tones without being too gray, which is my preferred method of doing cool tones. And Cosmic Beauty just has an amazing formula. The mattes, the shimmers, they're just so incredibly nice. And I'm just very excited overall about both of these two palettes. I just think they're doing Such a good job. Here comes the latest DD Signature palette, and we are really up there, but I think that the Fearless Holiday by DD Signature is an amazing palette. This is so beautiful, and her formula has never been as good as it is here. There is light mattes, there is darker mattes. These are incredible. There are some brighter ones. The shimmers are so spectacular. Overall, I just think this is so interesting. Again, there are different shades in here, but they still go together. There are like a theme to this palette while still exploring different color families. And I just think that there are so many good things to be had with this. The orange is just absolutely incredible, and I'm so excited that I have those in my life. Now, I love these, and I was so excited that these got released this year, and I'm ranking them at the same place because I absolutely love the collaboration that Lethal Cosmetics did with Avatar: The Last Airbender. They made 4 different 9-pan palettes, and so we have the Air one, which I think is a really nice color story. You can go neutral. This neutral shimmer down here is absolutely incredible. You can use some of these together with the dark brown. It's really cool as well. And also there is this almost like a brown to a purple, very interesting shimmer. Such a beautiful one. A lot of people preferred the earth one, and these kind of greens makes me so happy. Such a beautiful palette, really stunning. The fire one is truly fiery, and that red shadow in the middle is just so beautiful. And I love that there are some neutrals here, but also like these reds. Again, so excited. And I love the water palette. I love blues. I love that they did put a brown in here so that you can go with a brown crease if you would prefer that, to just ground it a little bit. The shimmers are incredible. I just think that they did so good with these palettes. I enjoy these a lot. I thought the quality was beautiful, and it was such an interesting way of just doing. I'm japping on about how much I love them, but I really do. I was looking through also my palettes, and I did not receive the day and night palettes by Lunar Beauty. I don't know if I wasn't sent them. I don't know if they got lost in the mail. I don't know if they're still on their way to me. I have no idea, but I usually do receive PR from them. But I think other than that, this is the only palette that Lunar Beauty released this year, and I feel like they usually release a little bit more, but maybe they don't. Maybe 2 in a year feels, yeah, maybe that's actually like, because we get so, I think that's also like, I'm saying problem very loosely here, but a lot of indie brands are releasing maybe too many eyeshadow palettes. So we keep thinking that 2 palettes is a little amount. But honestly, that's a kind of a normal amount. I take everything back. Love this one though. This is the Lunar Beauty Moonshroom palette. This is my journey. I was gonna say these are my people. Quite honestly, this is my people. I love these like grungy yellow leaning tones, and I love how like many dark shades we have. I think I'm gonna be honest with you, I think Lunar Beauty's shimmer formula is good, but it's not his most amazing formula that he has. And I love the inclusion of the purples down here as well. I think that makes this palette really interesting. I just think that this is a very inspired color story. And I think a lot of the palettes that you're going to see here, they're not necessarily better quality than some of the other palettes that we have talked about in, quite honestly, like top 30, but they're a little bit more inspiring to me. I think they're a little bit more unique in their color story, in their approach, and how flexible they are, and how happy they make me. I also really love this palette. This is the Aurora Lights by Simply Posh. Like I said, they don't release a lot of stuff, but when they do it really well. And I just really like how this looks. The shimmers are so beautiful. Again, I would have wished that one of these mattes were just a smidgen lighter, so I could have used it as an inner corner highlight. But again, I just think that this palette is so beautiful, and it really does look like the Aurora Lights. And I feel like this palette almost flew under the radar a little bit. I mean, maybe it's my fault too. Maybe I didn't talk enough about it either, but it's so beautiful. The shimmers are so impactful and stunning, and I just think that they make really impressive and fun stuff. This is such a good palette. I look at it and I'm like so excited. This is the Underland palette by NC Rain, and this makes me very happy. This is such an interesting grungy palette. There are some really cool textures in here. This again is a red to like a dark foresty green multichrome. There's a matte white here that just creates this amazing contrast together with these dark, moody, grungy colors. The green, the moody red, all of this is just so beautiful together with these impactful shimmers. This color story is so inspired. It's such a fun color story, and it really brings something new to the NC Rain like line as well, because they don't have anything like this before, and I just think it's such an inspired one. It makes me really happy. Okay, Cosmic Beauty this season. This is the holiday palette that they just came out with. This is such a bright and interesting take on the green and red, and also there is some purple in here. So there's a neutral row, there's a purple row, there's almost like a raspberry, slightly pinky leaning red row. This one is also like, I think you can see it's a green to a yellow to a red multichrome, and then there's this really bright green row that is not even like Christmas tree green. It's like maybe a fresh Christmas tree, like when it's out in the sun in June, you know, out in nature. It's an interesting take on a Christmas theme, and per usual, Cosmic Beauty's quality is just top, absolute notch, so beautiful. Another palette that I liked even more from Cosmic Beauty this year is the Undergrowth palette. I love mucky greens, I love yellow undertones. This is so beautiful. Again, I hope nobody's taking shots because you will be blackout drunk. Love these kind of additions of this like pea green thing. It's so beautiful. I just think this palette has so much to give. If I could change anything with this palette, I would make this brown even darker to give even more like versatility to the palette. But overall, I think this is so beautiful. And this shimmer here, this like a green to this almost like neutral, such an interesting neutral multichrome. Absolutely love it. Are we at top 3? Holy bananas. We are at top 3, and I contemplated a lot over what palettes truly made me go when I opened them, and truly made me so happy that I couldn't wait to use them again. Color stories where I'm like, oh, I have so many options, and also what I feel like I can do something on my own with this palette, or I cannot wait to mix and match this with other things. And one of my most like impressive palettes of the year is the Poison Garden by Bella Beauté, and this is a re-release, and I'm fairly sure that they did something that I've been complaining about throughout this entire video, and they reworked the color story for the re-release. It's a grungy palette that has almost like yucky, mucky, grungy tones, and this pop of bright blue, this incredible metallic black with multicolored like shimmer to it. And it also is some neutrals in here. And this is also like a palette where I'm like, this is just a new, interesting 2024 palette version of a neutral palette with a pop of blue. It's just so interesting. The shimmers are so good, and it just makes me so happy. And this palette truly would mix with the next palette that this palette mixed with the next palette I'm going to talk about would probably make the most inspiring and interesting looks ever. And now I'm kind of like, I want to do that. But I love this one. Great palette, great quality, not too big. Bella Beauté do love to do really big palettes, but I'm excited they were able to rein themselves in a little bit for this one. But it is just immaculate. I absolutely love it. I know that this is not everybody else's favorite palette, but this palette inspires me. I have nothing like this in my collection. I really think that for how tricky these colors are, because these are very hard colors to formulate and to get to be really good, I think they did a stellar job being able to make these really tricky colors work really good on the eyes. And I have been so inspired by this. And besides my own palette, this is my most used palette of the year, which you might not think when you first saw this palette. But the NC Rain Flourish palette floored me. I am so inspired by this palette. It is so different, and I can do a full look with this, which I have done, and I can also mix this with other palettes which I have done, there's just so many interesting combinations to be had in here, but also amazing colors to use like together with other palettes to just take them to the next level. And there's so hard to formulate really bright colors like these in a matte form, and I feel like they have done as good as you can with those kind of shades because they are not hard to pick up. You can definitely build them up. I mean, will they be like 100% opaque on the lid? Probably not, but they will be enough, and I think that they are just probably the best formulations that I have seen in these kind of like almost fluorescent like mattes. I just think they're beautiful. The shimmers are so interesting, and I love this palette. Makes me so happy, and it's just so different, and I don't know what it's about this. It just makes me happy. I really love it. Have you figured it out yet? Have you figured out which is number one? The palette that I'm wearing on my eyes? I saw this palette on social media when I was traveling, and I did a because it's so pretty. And when I was finally able to come home and finally able to dig into the Harvest of Souls by Fantasy Cosmetica, I love this palette. It is so fun. The packaging is so cute. The color story is so inspired. Again, nobody count how many times I've said that. I'm wearing these purple shades today, these three. That's the look I'm having here. This palette has so many options. Cool tones, warm tones, grungy tones, bright tones. The shimmers are incredible. And this is laid out in that way, do you know, I told you that I really like when they put them in clusters of how you can wear the shades, but they work like in diagonals together as well. So many things you can do with this palette, and it's so smart because you can use this one with this one, but you can also use this one with this one, or you can use this one with this one, or this. Like, there are so many combinations to be had. I am even sure that this one and this one would work because the undertone is so similar. There are two like pastels in here that you can use to really brighten looks up, and there are dark shades and there are shimmers and there are. It's so inspired. The color story is so inspired, and you can tell. And I know this because I have met the owner of Fantasy Cosmetica. You can tell that this palette is made by someone who loves makeup. Because you can tell that she's truly thought about how will this work together. And this is a palette that gives you so many options, so many combinations, and I just think this is beautiful. And I am so excited for Fantasy Cosmetica and for Fantasy Cosmetica this year, 2024. They've truly released some really killer palettes, and I cannot wait to see what is in store for them next year. And yeah, I did film this look as a little reel. If it's live, I will link it down below. What do you think about my ranking? Are you still here? Did you also need to go get something to drink? I finished mine. I finished mine. This has been a long day for me. Let me know which one was your absolute favorite palette of the year, which one was your least favorite palette of the year, and was there something that you thought I should have tried this year that I didn't? Did I miss something that was really good? Or was I able to dodge a bullet of something that was really bad? I would love to hear your thoughts down in the comments. Don't forget to subscribe before you leave, and I will see you real soon again in a new video. Bye!